Hi students, what comes first to your mind when you see this picture? There are different vehicles and these vehicles are used for different modes of transport. The transport modes we choose are different because according to our convenience we use the different modes of transport. In day-to-day activity also the body homeostasis is maintained by the different transport mechanisms that operate in our body. Today the topic is on transport across cell membrane. At the end of the session, the student should be able to enumerate the need for transport mechanisms, describe the different transport mechanisms with examples and differentiate between active and passive transport. This session comes under the competency number PY 1.5. So this is the fluid mosaic model of the cell membrane. This cell membrane is formed by a lipid bilayer in which you have the protein molecules embedded. This lipid bilayer is primarily made of glycoprotein, phospholipid and cholesterol. The phospholipid component is the major component and you have the polar or the hydrophilic phosphate heads with the non-polar or hydrophobic fatty acyl chains. The polar heads of the two layers are exposed to the extracellular and the intracellular compartments, whereas the non-polar or hydrophobic fatty acyl chains are facing each other. In the lipid bilayer, you have the integral proteins and the peripheral proteins. The integral proteins are the one which extends through the cell membrane with one surface exposed to the extracellular compartment and the other surface exposed to the intracellular compartments, whereas the peripheral proteins are the one which will be attached either to the extracellular or the intracellular compartment. So what are these transmembrane proteins? The transmembrane protein can either be a protein channel or a protein carrier. That is, a channel is a one which will allow the substances to move. It is just a passage, whereas the carrier has a binding site for the substance which is being transported. Channel is just a passage, whereas the carrier is having a binding site for the substance which is being transported. Both are transmembrane protein. You have an extracellular surface and an intracellular surface and they help in movement of substances across the membrane. Coming to the channel proteins are the one which will allow movement of ions or hydrophilic molecules, whereas the carrier protein are the one which will allow the solute molecules of large molecular size. The channel proteins are just a passage, whereas the carrier protein has a binding site for the transported material or the transporting molecule. Coming to the channel proteins are classified as leaky channels, gated channels and aquaporins. The leaky channel are the one which is open throughout. The movement of ion across of these channels will be there continuously. These channels are not closed and they are open throughout. Coming to the gated channels are the one which have gates, or the gates are operated either it is closed or open depending upon the stimulus. What is the stimulus? It can be either an electrical stimulus or a chemical stimulus or a mechanical stimulus. When the opening and closing of the gate occurs by means of a chemical substance, you call that as ligand gated channel. When the operation of the channel is controlled by an electrical stimulus, you call that as voltage gated channel, and when the channel operates in response to a mechanical stimulus, you call that as mechanosensitive channel. What are aquaporins? Aqua means water, porins means holes. Aquaporins are channels for water molecules to be transported. Coming to the carrier protein, I have already told the carrier protein has a binding site for the substance which is being transported. If the carrier protein transports only one substance in either direction, either from intracellular to extracellular or extracellular to intracellular, you call that as uniport. When it transports two substances simultaneously in either direction, you call that as symport. If the carrier protein transports one substance in one direction, the other in the opposite direction, you call that as antipode. The carrier protein can be either a unipode, sympode or antipode. Why should there be a transport mechanism? What is the importance of this transport mechanism? This transport mechanism is essential for maintaining optimal concentration of ions, for providing substrate for the cellular function, for synthesized products to be released for utilization by the other cells, for removal of waste products and for communication. Maintenance of optimal concentration of ions is important. We all know that the composition of the extracellular and the intracellular fluid is not the same. The concentration of ions are different, and maintenance of this differential concentration is absolutely essential for maintenance of homeostasis. Again, coming to the supply of substrate, different cell has different function, different metabolic pathways, and accordingly the requirement of the substrate also varies. So, transport of these substrates into the cell is achieved by the transport mechanism. Again, each cell will synthesize different products, and the product that are synthesized should be released into the circulation. Here again, transport mechanisms are important. For removal of waste products and for communication, we all know the language of our body is by electrical stimulus mostly or a chemical stimulus, and for this to be activated, again you have ions moving in and around. So, for communication also, transport mechanisms play a very important role. What are the types of transport? You have passive transport, active transport, vesicular transport, and transport across cell membrane. So, passive transport, it is passive. That means it moves from an area of higher concentration to a lower concentration. When it is moving from high to low, it does not require any energy. It is called as passive transport. Active transport is one where there should be some action. There is an energy expenditure. This energy expenditure is utilized for pushing the ions or molecules from an area of lower concentration into an area of higher concentration. So, this is active transport. In passive transport, it is occurring down the concentration gradient. Active transport occurs against or uphill transport. You call that as uphill transport. It requires energy. Vesicular transport is one which requires energy, but it does not have any relation to the gradient. It is not concerned about whether the concentration is more inside or outside, but it moves the substances whenever it is required. It requires energy, but it's not dependent on the gradient.